Okay, this is Chapter 5, Working with Parents. So when we think about working with parents, we often just think about having parents come in for an occasional parent conference, and then they go home, and that's pretty much it. However, an effective homeschool partnership really, you need to think about it as being a positive and convincing relationship. Okay, that's what you need. And you need to have this with family involvement, because when you have family involvement, you're going to have higher benefits for kids. What we know about family involvement in schools are that when families are involved in the school, then that child is going to do better academically. And this holds true for families across all economic, racial, ethnic, and educational backgrounds, as well as for kids of all ages. This isn't just for elementary. This is especially true for our middle school and high school kids. We sometimes think that middle school and high schoolers don't care about what their parents think anymore. We need to get away from that kind of thinking, because it is the absolute furthest thing from the truth. Kids whose parents are involved with the school earn higher grades, they get better test scores, they tend to enroll in higher level programs, they tend to be promoted on a more regular basis, and they tend to adapt better to the school where they're attending. They also have better social skills, and they tend to graduate. Now, that's especially of a special importance here in New Mexico, where we have about a 50% graduation rate across the state. So what we know about it is that parent involvement programs create engagement. We need to look at diversity in families. So we need to be encouraging those families that are of cultural or class differences. We also need to be sure that we are connecting with them through the community. So go to community functions where the school is located. You're going to see more of your parents there. And by doing this, you're going to help them to feel more at home when they're in your classroom. So I have several pictures here of different kinds of community relationships, or different kinds of communities, rather. And I just want you to kind of think about some of these different places. Now, obviously, this one down here, this is probably New York. We could think of New York City. We could think of, this could be Chicago. I've seen streets in Chicago that look like this. It could be almost any major city or residential area in the country, as could many of these places. Now, of course, we have our Wild West towns. We still have a few towns like this, where very, very small community, and the community is very interlinked with one another. We have our smaller types of communities. This could be base housing. Okay, I've seen base housing that look kind of like this. And then, of course, we have places like St. Louis. As you can see, the arch is the only city with an arch kind of like that. And some of the problems that go along with larger but older cities that have not been developed as well as they probably could have, and some of the problems that go along with that. So we need to make sure that we have upgraded school facilities. Now, one of the problems that we have in the area right around St. Louis, this is why I put this in here, isn't just because of the obvious racism that they're having difficulties with right now, but also of what that leads to. East St. Louis has some of the worst school facilities in the country. Some of the highest racial differences, and some of the widest poverty wealth gaps. Now, let's think about I want you to think about what that can cause in your classrooms, okay? So we need to make sure that we have programs that engage families so that we can support their children's learning at home, because this is going to be linked to higher student achievement. Family involvement at home appears to have some of the highest effects on student achievement, and it also has a protective effect. So we need to make sure that we're looking at how can we help the community members come into our school and work with us in our school, because even though there's less research on the effects of community involvement, there is enough research out there to tell us that it suggests that there are benefits for schools, families, and students when we have high community partnerships. You might want to look at some of the partnerships that come out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. You can find some of that in James Banks and Banks. So, it's very important that we look at these kinds of issues, because we want to look at high quality learning. We want to look at what kind of resources we have. We can find a lot of resources in the communities, and especially for after school programs, and how this is going to increase social capital for our students. So, when we are looking at achieving effective school, family, and community partnerships, first of all, to partner means that we have a relationship of some kind. So we have to have at least two people, okay? They have to have equal status in order to have a relationship, or a quality relationship anyway. But it also implies that you're going to have implicit or formal obligations to each other or other people within that relationship. Okay, had to get back on the right page here. All right, there we go. All right, so working with school staff to broaden the definition of family and community engagement. What does that really mean? Okay, what do we mean by broadening the definition? Basically, we have to make sure that families and communities are engaged with each other, and that they have adopted the attitude that all families have to be involved in their child's education. But we also have to understand that they also want some governance. Okay, so they want a little bit of control as well. So we have to make sure that we're linking efforts to engage families, whether it's at school, whether it's at home, or within student learning. So when programs and initiatives focus on building trusting and respectful relationships among school staff, families, and community members, these programs are effective in creating and sustaining meaningful partnerships. So effective programs mean that we're going to engage families and communities to embrace a philosophy of partnership. So the responsibility of the child's educational development is a shared collaborative enterprise. So what does it mean to keep parents informed? A lot of times we think, oh, we sent the note home. Why didn't you get that note that I sent? Well, I called and left a message on your answering machine. Actually, according to the Federal Supreme Court, leaving a message on an answering machine is not leaving a message, and it is not considered an acceptable way of communication with parents, because too many things can happen to those messages that we leave. So they say, the Supreme Court says, that if you do not actually speak to the person, you haven't left a message. So we want to keep parents informed. So we want to have some sensitivity to caregivers. Not all parents are the only caregivers, and we need to realize that. We might also want to start thinking about inviting those people to the IEPs as well, so that they have some input. We get their input, as well as they get our recommendations as to things that they need to do while they are being the caregiver. So we want to look at the teacher's understanding and respect for student values. You have to remember that home behavior may be different from school behavior. We always have to remember that. Parent involvement may vary. It varies by person. Your family structure may vary. Okay, for example, I have 2 children, and my children have they have 2 parents, but we live separately. And so when they would be at my house, we had a completely different structure than they had when they were at their dad's house or their grandparents' house. And the rules were different. So they had to learn the rules at each different place. And sometimes when you're going from one house to another back and forth, it gets a little confusing for kids. So and then we need to remember what we can do to help kids to kind of keep up with everything. So getting to know the parents can help you to understand factors about their child's academic background and how do they have a place to study at mom and at dad's or at grandma's or at the caregivers. Look at how adolescents perceive the dissonance between home and school. I've seen some adolescents that had absolutely no respect for their parents, but they would do whatever they were told when they were at school because of the respect that they had been earned from that individual, and because of that dissonance that they see or differences in how they see parents understanding the school concept. So this dissonance can actually lower student achievement, and it raises anger and hopelessness. So we need to make sure that we're contacting parents and guardians so that we can help them to understand what we're doing and so that we can understand what they're doing. So when we have teacher avoidance, and this could be either when teachers are avoiding parents or parents are avoiding teachers, okay? You can look at it either way. But we need to remember that there's a reason for avoiding contact with parents. And in this case, we're talking about teachers avoiding parents, okay? If teachers are not comfortable talking to parents, then they're probably going to avoid the idea of a parent conference. That's because they don't know how to do a parent conference. But we're going to talk about that here in a couple seconds here, okay? A couple minutes. Now, the second and third leading causes of teacher beliefs about parents and their roles are skill, okay? If you don't understand something, it's much more likely to have a negative opinion of it. So, methodology, you need to have an introductory letter, okay? So, first of all, we're going to send home a note stating that we're going to have a parent conference. You want to tell them why we're having a parent conference, okay? But do not get negative. Ask for help with language differences if you need it. Now, my suggestion is do not go to the custodian, okay? Not a good person to go to. Find someone in the school, a faculty member, who knows the language, okay? And this is especially true if you're working with somebody who's in special education. You need a special education professional to help you with the translation because they need to understand special education language and the home language, both. Have a phone call. Good phone calls, bad phone calls, okay? I'm having trouble with this. I just wanted to tell you how good Johnny did today, okay? Doing home visits. Now, about home visits, do not ever go by yourself. You should always go with at least one person, no more than 2. You don't need any more than that. That's a little overwhelming. Let the parents know that you're coming ahead of time so that if they need to pick up the living room, they can. and always sign out of the front office. My suggestion is go with someone like one of the guidance counselors. Okay, that's who I always went with. Um, and have some kind of an initial meeting, initial time when you can bring parents in. You have to make sure that parents know that they're respected, validated, and affirmed. So when they're telling you something that's difficult, you need to listen to that. And then you can say something back to them, such as, that must have been really tough, or that must have been a really exciting period in your life, so that they know that you heard what they said. Find out what kind of involvement they're able to give and what kind of contributions they can make. And look at how school staff and families put children, no matter how big or small, at the center of educational issues. So if the child is at the center of the issue, then you've got a much better chance of being able to bring the parents in. You also have to look at those barriers. We have a lot of barriers or things that keep parents from lending their support. Okay? These are things like past experiences. Find out what their experience in school was like. Not all parents have had a lovely time in school. We've got a lot of people out there who have gone through difficult times during their school years, and sometimes those times really affected how they interpreted their school experience. If they had a difficult time learning, that is going to impact how they talk to their child about school. Look at the time that parents have to give. Look at transportation issues. I think transportation issues are probably one of the biggest barriers to move beyond. Look at how, the parental relationship. What do you feel when you're talking to both mom and dad if they are both available? Also, look at the location where you are. Different parts of the country have different concepts of how we should be addressing barriers. So get some input from your guidance counselor and principal and assistant principal. And again, get quality translation, okay? Do not use the student. Do not use another parent. Do not use the custodian or secretaries. They are not trained to do translation. They might be able to do it, but they're not really trained to do it. So get a faculty member. Now, after you've had this initial meeting, which we'll talk about how to set up the initial meeting here in a second, you should have some kind of follow-up. So send a note home in a week. So say you've decided that you're going to use weekly planners. Be sure that you send that home by Friday. Have a Friday envelope. Put together a newsletter or video recording that you can send out, especially if all your parents have email. But do not depend on all of your parents having email. Send more regular progress reports if that's what's been asked for. Keep very accurate records, okay? This is extraordinarily important. Have a classroom website where you can put articles and the students' assignments up so they're easy for students to get to, especially if they forget a form or something that they need to complete their activity. Get parent volunteers. It doesn't matter how old the child in your classroom is. Find somebody who can volunteer to help with different kinds of activities. And also use personalized stationery, okay? So that students and parents know how to get in touch with you. And in this way, you're going to be embracing partnership and sharing power, okay? Because when you give information, information is power. So it helps families to want to be engaged. So whenever you're making a new policy in your classroom, such as your classroom management project, this is one of the ways that you can consult families about the policy. You can tell them what the policy is and then ask them, do you have any suggestions? What are your thoughts? Involve families in action research. Okay? So a lot of teachers do action research across the board across the country, and this is one of the ways that we get new information about how something worked in your classroom. And by doing this, we can also provide some access to principals and staff and come up with better ways of connecting to community groups. So you want to support family involvement in decision making, promote their connections with each other. So have a parent group, have a listserv or a phone tree of everybody in the classroom, of their parents, okay, so that parents can talk to one another. Find a way to respond to their concerns. Okay, so you might want to bring and have focus groups about parent concerns if you have a policy that everybody's concerned about. And give families the information about how things are going to work in your classroom. So I have some ideas here on joining activities, okay? Things that you can do to help families to be more involved. All right, when you're having a conference, provide childcare. Find somebody in the school who can provide some childcare. Translation services and snacks, even if it's just Oreos, okay? Send home monthly tips for parents on helping out with math and report cards. Send out magnets. You know, a lot of times the school district has these things that you can send out. Send out book bags, okay? Create an Ask the Principal event for parents to come in and just sit down and talk to different people in the school. A family suggestion box. You know, a lot of times if we have suggestion box, parents will just come in and drop things in. That doesn't mean that they are going to stay to talk to anybody, but they will use it. And create a list of questions for teachers and parents to follow for more meaningful conferences. Provide better signage outside, okay? We don't want them to just know where the front office is, but on the hallways, we need to have directional finders. Some of our, especially middle school and high school hallways, can be very confusing. When you have a parent coming to see you, greet them at the front door. Or when they come, have the secretary call you down. Don't tell them to come and find you. You go and find them. Set up an open door policy that it works within the school policy, okay? Ask families what you can do to better support their child, and let them know what they can do to better support their child at home. Do good news phone calls, and have events in places other than school, okay? So sometimes have an event at, say, the local church. It's a community place, okay? Or at the local park. So, some long-term activities. Make sure that all your materials are translated, okay? Have parent conferences, you know, those wonderful parent conferences that we all kind of dread, but we need to do, mainly because we don't have enough parents coming to them. But try and have more opportunities for parents to come. Have them after school. And you know, I always found that if we have IEPs during some of those times, we're more likely to get parents. I remember I've had several IEPs at 6:30 at night instead of during the daytime. But we did them during these parent conference times. Conduct home visits, again. Have workshops for different kinds of things. Have a computer class for parents. A lot of parents really feel inadequate when it comes to using the computer. And I know whenever I have a question about the computer and I need help with something, my daughter tends to just do it for me. Sometimes I feel like she must think that I'm an idiot or something, but don't anybody who knows her tell her I said that. But sometimes kids just do it for us, just like when we ask them to load the dishwasher and we know they're not going to do it the way we like it, we probably wind up doing it ourselves. Okay? But if we give computer classes to parents, then it's going to give them some other things that they can have in common with their students. Help them learn how to help with homework, dealing with the teen years. That one anybody can help with. Everybody needs help with that one. Preparing for college. Most parents do not know how to help their children prepare for college. Looking at the first day of school events, having summer activities before school starts, and looking at how to better conduct your conferences. So, a conference is more productive when everybody is prepared for it. Okay? That makes good sense, right? Well, what is recommended is that students are present or at least involved in the conferences. Okay? Prepare for the conference. You want to have all of your paperwork together. That means you need to have your grade reports caught up, all your grades caught up for that student. You want to have the issues that you're going to be discussing ready. You want to have an agenda. Okay? Agenda is like very, very important here, okay? When you have an agenda, you know exactly what it is you're going to talk about. So you're going to talk also about goals. Has the student, the parents, or you in the classroom actually discussed goals with the students? Okay? And continue your ongoing positive contact. So when you start this, you want to be very positive. And you want to send that agenda home as soon as possible, but at least a week in advance if at all possible. So when you're looking at the parent-teacher conference, you want to make sure that students, again, and parents know what you're going to be doing. We don't want to scare students half to death, okay? We want to discuss our goals for the conference, but also any personal goals they might have. Discuss academic work. Create as a relaxed atmosphere as possible. So do not sit behind your desk with parents on the other side of the desk. That creates a power differential. Have your chairs sitting in a circle, not desks, chairs. Try and make them as comfortable as possible. Okay, so we don't really want parents sitting in a 5-year-old chair. Okay, have big people chairs in your classroom. Discuss their academic work, and then also discuss some of the things that they're doing in the classroom that are positive. So you want to intersperse those positive and negative remarks. Find out how the student and the parent feels about your class. If you're doing any interventions in the classroom, discuss those. And then also discuss any academic work or needs that the student has. So conferences should always, whether it's with a parent or a colleague, should always be aimed at finding solutions. So start positive, okay? State several positive qualities, and then discuss academic matters. Intersperse your positives with any negatives that you have to deal with, especially if you're dealing with behavioral issues. And leave time for questions. Don't just rush the parent through there, because then they're not going to feel like they've been heard. And make a plan. Now, after your conference, you're going to want to have a follow-up. So you want to continue that conversation with the parents. So send some notes home. Call them. Ask them how things are going. Because what this is going to do is going to reinforce your commitment to their child, but it's also going to reinforce their commitment to your student. Okay? Because really, we've got two different people here. We've got the parent's child and the teacher's student. The same person, but two different contexts. And it also helps us to know what kind of commitments we can depend on. And it reminds parents of any agreements that they've made to work on, okay? And also provide a written record of any agreements that you've made. So, parent and teacher conferences. Whenever you're having difficulty, now if you feel like this is going to be a really negative one, bring the principal in. Just have him tell them that he's observing you. He or she is observing you as a teacher, and he or she has to observe you doing a conference. You know, but some ways of downplaying any negatives are to meet in a safe setting. Greet them in a pleasant manner. Now, don't be creepy about it, okay? But be pleasant. You don't have to smile 100% of the time. Be active. So you want to use active, careful listening. I hear you saying, okay? So in other words, you are telling me that, okay? Summarize what they've said to you so that they can correct you if you've made a mistake. Set a time limit. Parent conferences should never go over 30 minutes, okay? It's exhausting, and it really turns into browbeating if it's any longer than that. Find out if the student is aware of any problems that you might be talking about, and be very honest. We can't beat around the bush with parents because parents already know what we're talking about, okay? And look at specific data. Always have your data with you. This is one reason why I say if you didn't write it down, you didn't do it. That means you should always have anecdotal notes in that notebook that I have told you to be sure and put together. And state what needs to be done about the problems in your classroom and ask if they have any other suggestions. Understand, and then when you come to the cultural issues, okay? Understand your own cultural context. How do you feel about things? What are your own political or cultural leanings? How do you feel about different cultures? Ask them about their cultural traditions and norms, okay? If you don't ask them, you're never going to find out. And invite families and community members to tell educational stories when they come in to see you. And ask them about their expectations. So what are your expectations for your child? Or what are your hopes and dreams? Parents tend to like the words hopes and dreams a little bit better, I think. Okay, now sometimes we will have student-led conferences, which I think is really a great idea because it helps students to have a better understanding of what their needs are, especially when we're trying to teach them how to advocate for themselves. So again, promote goal setting and self-evaluation, and help them to bring in some work samples and make a portfolio so that they can share their goals and their progress. And so we want to have some instruction for students on how to lead their conferences, because sometimes it's really scary because they're talking to all these, they're talking to their parents about how they're actually doing, and sometimes it's really difficult for kids. Now, sometimes we have to remember that it can be a little bit disappointing because we need to work on honing this skill, okay? So, one of the things that we can do to help families and communities, we need to acknowledge the family base, the knowledge base of the family, and we need to conduct an asset map. Okay? So, assets or needs, and we've got a nice little map right here that you could probably use, or you can, do offshoots of it. So, community and neighborhood. And then you might also have school. You might have family over here, okay? And how they all come together. Now, the reason that I suggest this is because sometimes a pictorial view of how families are interrelating with the school and the community kind of helps them to see where the needs and the assets are at.